Okay. Just tap the microphone. Okay. Are you hearing any sound?
Test, 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 test.
Can you talk to it?
Good day, everybody. We're setting up.
Test, test, test.
Okay, you got it. That was a big delay. Okay, I heard the sound, yeah? كويس. دقيقة دقيقة. Alright, the last thing we'll do is don't close it, yeah? خلاص ان شاء الله تمام يعني كذا لايف تمام. Right? Done. Is it ready? Yes. Because Said checking in the channel, he said everything is good. Alhamdulillah. But we need the voice, just the last one. Yeah, the mic. Hello.
Good day.
Hi.
How you doing?
Hi. Yeah, yeah.
time. He is professor of Middle Eastern History and Archaeology at New York University in the Institute for the Study of the Ancient World. He received both his BA and PhD from Oxford University, where he later taught, as well as at St. Andrews University in the UK. He is the author of Seeing Islam and As Others Saw It, published in 1997, Arabia and the Arabs, published in 2001, and In God's Path, the Arabs' Conquest and the Creation of an Islamic Empire. All of these have been translated into Arabic. Robert's conducted field work throughout the Middle East and currently is excavating a monastery dating from the pre-Islamic into the Islamic, I think you said 4th to maybe 7th, 8th centuries. And an early Islamic, a monastery and early Islamic settlement in a now deserted island of the UAE called Sinea. Tonight he's going to be speaking to us about the birth of Arabic on stone and the rise of Arabian monotheism. So thank you very much, Robert.
Thank you, Rebecca. So thank you for coming. It's very nice to be here. And yeah, particularly as I was uncertain whether it would happen or not. Now the only problem is I haven't had much sleep, so I may be a little incoherent, but I'll do my best. So I've put here Birth of Arabic on Stone, Rise of Arabian Monotheism and Late Antiquity. It's quite an ambitious set of things to get through. I'll focus mainly on the Arabic and the monotheism, but I want to start off just saying something about the late antiquity part. It's, for me at the moment, I'm particularly thinking about it because working in East Arabia, and it's the same really across the peninsula, the period from around 300 to 700 is still not very well known. We have some fantastic cities going up to around 300, and from around 750 things take off in a huge way, especially the East Coast with a massive boom in Indian Ocean trade. But in between that, still a little tricky. So I'm thinking about it in particular at the moment. So late antiquity was, I'm going to start off with my first thing, initially coined and evolved as a concept in response and against the idea of dark ages, the idea that barbarians were destroying civilization, ruining cities, and that it ushered in a period of very low cultural output. Peter Brown in particular pushed this with a very beautiful book, The World of Late Antiquity, which showed that it actually was a flourishing period in many ways. Literature was being produced in substantial quantities. It was an age of spirituality and so on. So a very warm and culturally active period. But it's worth remembering still, and I start off unfortunately number one, that nevertheless there is a substantial, at best you can say, transformation in settlement patterns. Many of the cities that were flourishing through the Hellenistic and Roman periods are either abandoned or at least reduced in size. This is actually Adur on the coast of Al-Gawain Emirate, looking particularly, well, ruined at the moment. It's actually a huge area of settlement, but now, looking very, unfortunately, in a poor state. So there's quite a few cities that are like Adur, huge, flourishing through Hellenistic Roman periods, Taj in east of Saudi Arabia, Maleha and Adur in the Emirates, and then Qarat al-Faw in the south, which fortunately is getting new excavations. But I just spoke to Seth Priestman, who's working at Soha. He actually was looking at he looks at the pottery everywhere in Arabia. He's become the Arabian pottery guru. And he told me again that Qarat al-Faw, they're still not really seeing anything past 300. And the same goes for Hegra and Tema. In the south of Arabia, it's even more dramatic. This is a diagram from Jeremy Shitakat's article on late antique period in South Arabia, settlement activity, and you see a huge distinction between the top diagram showing settlements attested in the 3rd century and the bottom diagram. Really, I'm sure that's partly skewed by our knowledge of, of what has been surveyed and so on, but the white dots are actually archaeologically attested sites, and then, as I say, there's a really substantial difference between the two periods. And this has been picked up by a number of archaeologists in the early 2000s, Barbara Finster pointing out the gap after the 4th century CE. Derek Kennett in particular has been very influential for his work on East Arabia. And again, countering this, late antiquity has this strong narrative in a lot of studies of continuity. Things actually went on much as before. And although that's been helpful in some ways to counter an idea that everything is just horrible after 300, it does sometimes too much overplay the continuity, whereas in reality there really is a substantial change. In East Arabia, there are hardly any settlements that are active for this period of the 3rd to 7th century that have so far been excavated. I'll tell you a little bit about our excavation later, because actually that happens to be one which we were pleased to inform Derek definitely continues through the Sasanian period. But nevertheless, he's right, there is a dramatic drop in settlement activity in this period. And Jeremy has pointed that out for South Arabia. The 4th to 6th centuries reflect a progressive decline of sites of sedentary occupation. And of course, just up the road, Hegra, we see an example of this. As Baozu said in a recent publication, the site was abandoned or quasi-abandoned by circa 360 CE. That's actually done according to carbon dating, but it's kind of rather graphic, visually demonstrated by this latest Nabatean Aramaic inscription, a very beautiful one actually, from 356 AD, mentioning the Rish of Hegra and of Taima, the head of Hegra and of Taima, two Jewish families, and the latest coin from the 350s. This doesn't, of course, mean that there's not activity. There are some hints, in fact, from the pottery that Hegra does continue. A number of you can tell me more about that than I know. But it does mean that there is a definite reduction in activity. There's a number of factors that explain this, and are very important when we're considering what's going on in this period. One of the most dramatic is the shift from a Hellenistic Roman Parthian system to a Roman Sasanian system. The Parthian Empire was very decentralized. It allowed a number of smaller kingdoms to flourish, Characene and Hatra up in Armenia. Whereas in the Sasanian period, the Sasanian dynasty deliberately set out to really centralize their empire much more, and that meant pretty much getting rid of some of these more independent little entities. And really right across, I mean, presumably what they're trying to do is push back against the Romans and to establish a real kind of frontier zone that protects their interests, all the way up from Armenia. So Shapur appoints his eldest son as king of Armenia, kicking out the local dynasty. And then all the way down to Arabia. Shapur II campaigns in Arabia. And both Ardashir and Shapur really push hard against the Romans, defeating emperors Gordian, Philip, and Valerian in battle. Second, again, extremely important development is the conversion of Emperor Constantine I to Christianity in 312 CE, which ushers in a kind of close linking between politics and religion. That sounds a very glib thing to say, so yes, of course, but this is actually a very dramatic change. The Roman emperors, as long as you, and going back really all the way, to Assyrians and so on, you pay your homage to the emperor cult, but otherwise you're perfectly free to follow whatever local religions, cults that you want to. So the fact that the emperor now shares the same religion as his subjects, as most of his subjects, and has a strong interest in ensuring that the religion is followed correctly and in determining what is orthodox, what is correct religion, that really is a huge difference. And there's a lot of winners and losers. Pagan temples gradually disappear, and churches and priests and so on pop up, and bishops. So there's a lot of changeover in personnel, in elites, in visual, literary production, and so on. So it's actually a really substantial reworking of Middle East society. It's interesting how much the Sasanian Empire did the same. There's a very famous inscription from a high priest called Qatir, who says about wanting to keep in check the other religions. But it's rather, people extrapolate from this one inscription under the reign of Shapur I, who say, aha, the Persian Empire is pretty much the same as the Roman Christian Empire. But we really don't know that. And we don't know whether Zoroastrianism was really a proper state religion in the same way as Christianity was. The fact that the Roman emperor had now accepted Christianity and was enforcing this gradually more and more as an imperial ideology meant that many regional kings had to make their decision whether they would follow suit or not. And we have an example across the sea in Ethiopia, the king of Aksum, Ezana, who switches during his reign from 320 to 360 from pagan proclamations on coins are the most evident, the son of Mehrem who cannot be conquered by the enemy, who's supported by the gods, a number of gods are named, then to a rather neutral, the might of the Lord of Heaven, and then to a very clear Trinitarian Christian position in the faith of God and the power of the Father, Son and Holy Ghost. I believe in your Son, Jesus Christ, who saved me. And you see on the coin at the right-hand end, a cross now appears, as opposed to the sun and moon. So this leads me on to my first theme of the talk, the rise of monotheism in late antique Arabia. In South Arabia too, we see really dramatic, actually, shift in the vocabulary and style of inscriptions. And again, this is a massive change. We've had 1,300 years of pagan inscriptions, appealing and invoking various dynasties, and suddenly it seems that it's all gone. So you see on the one on the left, a standard sort of invocation to such a work was completed with the aid of, and then the various deities are listed, starting at the top, Akhtar Sharik, and then going down to the small little deities lower down, very local, even particular to individual households. And then that's swept away, and then we just get works that were carried out with the aid of El, Lord of the Heaven, Baal Shemain, the normal, but in different ways, asking El for help, granting of bounties, and so on. And this seems to happen around the mid-4th century. And by the 380s, that's it. We get no more pagan inscriptions. In the very monumental inscriptions, anyway. From South Arabia, the last couple of decades, we were fortunate enough to find documentary texts, small little texts written on palm stalks. And these are nice because they take us down the social scale a bit. They're individual letters, prayers, and so on. And there we actually see a little bit more continuation of the old deities, but they still disappear fairly soon afterwards. It's normally stated that the elite have converted to Judaism. We don't actually know that really. The inscriptions that do have clearly Jewish connotations, like expressions like Rab Yehud, or the Rahman, the deity who's Lord of Heaven and Israel, are actually only on private inscriptions of individuals. But those coming from the kings and the lords, the Qales, are actually using very neutral sort of language. Rahman, Mor Shmayo, Lord of Heaven, and so on. So we don't actually know really what's happening. It's one of the problems of just having these monumental inscriptions. They just evoke in the name of so-and-so. What does that mean to you? We just don't know at all what exactly it means when someone says in the name of the Merciful One. So we don't have the literature, the liturgy, the prayers, the smaller, detailed descriptions of religion that would help us understand. But it's only in the 6th century that you get a clear public display of Judaism and Christianity, both religions featuring in inscriptions, especially in the time of the clash between Aksum and Himyar, and then in particular embodied by Dhu Nuwas on the Himyarite side, and the Aksum-backed Sumo Yafat. And then the rise of this Aksumi general who breaks out on his own. He kicks out Sumo Yafat and rules in his own name. And we get this nice capital that was reused in the San'a Mosque, has the cross on it, and then what plausibly is an image of the Virgin Mary with child. There's still a difference between styles of what one assumes Christianity. So it's important to realize doesn't seem to be a monolithic sort of religious situation. There is some variety. So in the expressions of these two rulers, Sumu Yafat uses the Ge'ez expression for the Holy Spirit, Manfas Qadas, we never know the vowels, as opposed to Abraha uses Ruh, which is more coming from Syriac rather than Ge'ez. And Sumu Yafat uses a Greek formulation and he uses the Rahman and his son, Christ, whereas Abraha never says son, he just says, and his Messiah. Again, what lies behind these differences is not so easy for us to get to, but it's important to realize there is diversity there. It's not just a simple monolithic or a simple situation of Judaism and Christianity. East Arabia is easier to speak about because we have more external sources. So there's a number of archaeologically attested Christian sites and also attested in literature. In particular, we have collections of the synods of the East Syrian Church. So it might be a bit small for many of you to see, but yeah, different synods. So when there's a grand assembly of the East Syrian Church, the minutes were kept and these were copied out, and we were lucky enough to have the survival of many of these. In particular, what's useful is at the end they all sign to say if they attended or if they sent someone in their stead, and they say, it's usually the bishops, and they say what their seat is. Later in the 6th century we also get monks mentioned. So, and this coincides with the building of monasteries in East Arabia, 4 of which survive. Darin at the top there is on Tarut Island, and I'm excited to see what they find. They've started excavating there. This was a major town in the Sasanian period. So again, there's winners and losers, as I was saying, for settlement in this period, and it's particularly those settlements that seem to be major Christian centres which are flourishing. For example, Najran in the south of Saudi Arabia continues through the Sasanian period, and Darin, I think, will be the same, and we wait to see for that one. I'll talk a little bit about my excavation. It's a very beautiful excavation. I'm very excited by it. This is the first 2 seasons we were excavating the monastery and a related settlement there, which that went out of use earlier and was used as a cemetery. Interestingly, 41 bodies have been disambiguated, whatever the word is, this year by a couple of Italian bone experts. We're waiting. The good thing is lots of nice, well-preserved teeth, so we're hoping to get lots of DNA evidence. There's actually a newly set up ancient DNA centre in the Emirates, so the director's very excited. We're going to be the first kind of research project for him to analyse all the finds from these bones. How do we know it's a church? Sorry, a couple of slides from somewhere else. We have the standard kind of 3 aisles, narthex, altar area, and then a whole series of buildings closely attached. Where I put monastic buildings, you can see actually the benches are probably a dining area, or general gathering area, you meant there. We found remains of ash with bread, what looked like remains of bread in the put oven area there. There's a rather strange, circular, well-built stone structure which was evidently used for water. We're still debating between font and fish pool, sacred fish pool, but not easy to determine. We did have some rather nice finds which make it clear it's a church. One of the rather nice chalices, the glass chalices, they're in use. And so yeah, the bread making for the Eucharist. So a couple of slides from just our work this season. So there's the edge of the monastery with the font, and there's a whole series of small little 3-room buildings, and we're assuming these are plausibly the residences for monks, just little cells for monks which are just scattered about the area. There's a couple that are later or continue to be used after the monastery. We're still sorting that out. And then what was a surprise, we could see that there were some mounds just to the south of the monastery, very low lying, and we assumed they were just very small little houses just for ancillary staff for the monastery, people doing the cooking and cleaning. But it turned out to be a really densely packed settlement. Some small buildings, but some, like these two here, very substantial multi-room buildings with often what looks like a courtyard, and some surprisingly luxurious finds, some very fine glassware, some Sasanian seals. So the range from carbon dating and pottery sequencing suggests 4th to 7th centuries for the settlement. So this would actually nicely fulfill Derek's requirement for a Sasanian period settlement. So we're very excited to be able to explore this further. Very large numbers of diving weights and torpedo jars suggest we put pearl diving and trading as the main 2 activities, because it's just sand, there's no soil, so they can't be growing anything or even making pottery, so they're importing everything. And there's a very high amount of imported pottery from India, for example, as about 20%, which is quite high. Otherwise, Iraq is the next most major contributor. We're lucky enough to have one actual literary work, The Life of Saint Yunan. It's a bit of a hagiographical novel, but plausibly you could use it for the setting. Assume that what's assumed, even if it doesn't actually happen, the fact that they assume, for example, that someone would give a ship and this could be sold to buy land and date palms is a plausible setting. So there's an assumption, anyway, of trading, commercial maritime trading. Moving on through our monotheisms, so in North Arabia there's evidence for Christianity at Hira and Dumat al-Jandal. The one on the left is from Hira. Unfortunately, there's been quite a lot found at Hira, but it's being put into proper context by a German team at the moment. But a lot was found during an expansion of Najaf airport. But they kind of did a fair amount of damage before much was recorded. So it's still, and the Germans are being thorough but slow, so not that much good information is coming out yet. But they didn't actually mention inscriptions. It looks to me as though there's writing around it, but anyway, a clear cross. And then at Dumat al-Jandal, there's been a couple of texts now found in very nice, clear Arabic script, and a couple of them with an adjacent cross, making it clear the Christian setting. So this allows me to jump to my second theme, the fact that we've got this very nice Arabic, Christian Arabic text, to think about the rise of Arabic script in late antique Arabia and whether it's at all connected with the rise of monotheism. Of course, Arabic had already been written before Christianity in local scripts. For example, in the local Lihyanite script from here, from Al-Ula, the funerary monument of Absamin, son of Zayd Harim, built by Salama, daughter of As Arasan. A number of these texts you could read, you could argue with different languages. In this case, it's the plausibly female demonstrative Aleti, which Salama built, and also the use of the object pronoun Aleti Banaha Salama, which suggests it's Arabic. Further in the north, in the Syrian desert and Jordan, you sometimes find Arabic written in Greek script. This is a rather fascinating text. It looks like someone's trying to represent how they speak very graphically, replacing vowels with Greek vowels, and often giving these amazing, like 4 or 5 vowels in a row. So it's not how you would expect to write Arabic letters directly, but rather someone trying to write as they speak. But it's very clearly in Arabic. Some arguments about the exact interpretation, but clearly Arabic. And then most commonly, especially in the area of the former Nabatean kingdom, Arabic written in Nabatean Aramaic script. Of course, this is the famous one. I don't have a good photograph of this one, or at least it's probably because of the brightness of the rock. The way the light is hitting the rock, it doesn't come out so clearly. But this is considered the oldest Arabic inscription from Hegra, and a funerary inscription built. So it says this tomb was built Sana'ahu Ka'b in Haritha li-Raqush bint Abd Manat. So it's Ummu. So it's Haritha builds this tomb for his mother Raqush ibn Abd Manat. We're here halikat fil hajr. If I say it, you hear it's kind of almost sounds like modern Arabic. And she died in al-Hijr sanat mi'a wastin with tnain. Vocalization, you could pronounce that in a more Aramaic-y way or in a more Arabic-y way, as you liked, really. The words in red are more definitely Aramaic, but it's likely that they're more just fixed, symbolic. So that, for example, the use of BR to write son of, as opposed to bin, bar rather than bin, is presumably it's just seen. You write BR, that means son of. You don't really even need to think about it. It's the kind of weird thing like in English when you write LB and you say pound, you don't say Libra or LB. So it's just a logogram, if you like. And some presumably more formulaic. When he gives the month date, he uses Biyirah Tammuz, in the month of Tammuz. But even often when people analyze these inscriptions, they assume the words are fixed. So Yirah, Yarha is the Aramaic word for month, Shahr is the Arabic word, and so therefore we divide them up. But we don't really know that in the dialect of Hegra, in the 3rd century, in the Arabic dialect, which has been in contact with Aramaic for 800 years, that actually Yarha was the word for month. It's a bit like analysing English. If I say, oh, I went to the cafe, aha, he switched to French, he said cafe, which is obviously a crazy way to analyse. So we don't even know if this is necessarily would have been perceived as Aramaic. But you can see it's very little Aramaic. The other is the Moray Alma, the expression Lord of the Worlds. Otherwise, it works as a fairly straightforward Arabic inscription. It asks for La'na, Allah, if you like, the God, Man Yashna al-Qabr, al-Qabr da, sounding a bit Egyptian there, wa man yaftahahu, Hasha Wulda Wala'na Man Yakbur Wa Ya'lai Minho. So someone's asking about the oldest Arabic inscription. This is often wheeled out anyway as one of the oldest, more distinctively and coherently Arabic inscriptions, but clearly written at this stage in Nabatean Aramaic. Another extremely famous text is the epitaph of Mordal Qais from Namara in southern Syria. I think this is the tomb of Mordal Qais, son of Amr, king of all the Arabs. And then the one phrase that's particularly marks it, because many of them you could argue either way if there's only names and odd words, whether they're Arabic or Aramaic. But this, Walam Yabluh Malikon Mablarahu, is such a classic Arabic expression that marks it out clearly as Arabic.
Excuse me, can I ask something?
Yeah.
Is it custom for tombs to have such signage for cursing people who will enter the tomb?
Yes.
It's part from the pharaohs.
In a pagan setting, yes, extremely common. I suppose you put a lot of effort into building these rather monumental tombs, so you don't want people to stick their family into your family tomb. So yes, it's very common. Yeah, quite in a very widespread way. You'll find it in Rome and Damascus. And, it's a very widespread. As you said, in Egypt, it's a very widespread custom. The script we're seeing there is still very classic Nabatean Aramaic, not really any hint of an evolution of a distinctive Arabic script. I always find it a little tricky. The more you look at hundreds of these texts, the more they just start looking. You wonder whether many of them are just badly written Nabatean Aramaic scripts. But anyway, I'll go with the prevailing theory, especially as I'm meeting Leila Nehmeh later this week, who's done so much work on trying to show the evolution of Nabatean Aramaic to Arabic. And it is true that if you go from the 2nd century anyway to the 6th century, that you do see a very clear distinction. And Arabic is not really a separate script. If Arabic had happened to die out in the 8th century AD, we would have simply called it late Nabatean script. We would never have said there was an Arabic script. It's only because it gets taken up by an Arabic Muslim elite for the whole use of a whole empire that we actually give it a separate name. Some of the evolution, and a lot of it really flows from keeping a baseline. So if you look at these sorts of inscriptions, there's no real baseline. Only one word. Interestingly, it tends to be on words that occur extremely frequently, so they're almost like a logogram type of thing. So Sanna, there is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines down. The first word is Sannat. S-N-T, doesn't look like it that much, but that a little bit, but not really much. So there's no real keeping to a baseline. And then the same actually for this inscription, you see the baseline for the second word, Nefesh, the tomb, and that's just because, again, that's such a common word that probably the scribe can do it fairly quickly, and you get, and has a formulaic way of doing it.
I'm reading from right to left.
Yeah, right to left, yeah. But there are a few from a bit later, probably 4th, 5th century, most of them, which you can see here keep a very distinctive line going across. And that has the effect of making some of the letters fit to this baseline. So for example, the seen, the end of the second letter, which is upright with 2 little bars that way, if you make that lie flat, then effectively, which is in the second word there, you've actually got a Arabic scene, if you like. And the same with the Ain. The Ain should be T Nefesh Mordal Qais Ibn Amr. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The 6th word, the Ain. So it should be. It's a stroke at 45 degrees and a stroke going this way. It's got a slight curve to it, this one. But again, if you put that flat, as in the word abd here is the name Abd-Is, then you see it's starting to look much more like an Arabic ayn. And in the salam here as well, the sin there, like flat rather than upright, it starts to look much more like an Arabic letter. And there's a particularly so there's two key distinct things that make the aesthetics really of Arabic distinct from Nabatean Aramaic. One is the baseline. The other is a distinction between ascendant letters and the lower order letters like mim, nun, ya, and so on. In the really nice imperial Umayyad inscriptions, you see this really well. You get very long, high ascendant letters, the alif and the lam, and so on. And then in a perfect, almost it's like a perfect 1-to-3 proportion with all the other lower letters. And this is actually rather nicely caught in an inscription on the Da'abakasa. So the name Tha'laba here is very nice. The lam goes up nicely, very nice baseline here. And then the Tha, Ayn, open Ayn, Ba, and He, kind of keeping a relative height, similar height, which is distinct from the high-rising lam. And same with Al-Malik. The only bit that this guy doesn't do so well is keeping his alifs upright. His alifs are both fallen down. So Leyla Nahmeh has done a good job of collecting a considerable number, probably a couple of hundred of these texts, and trying to order them neatly. They're a little tricky because, well, you can see with these, there's some letters that are and some that aren't. So, for example, the sky is being remembered, Takir, the Tab, well, with Salam, and then that's Samnat, but the Sin there is upright again, with the two bars that way rather than lying down. So, there's not really 100% really smooth evolution. But then, when we get to the 6th century, we have quite a number of inscriptions that we would recognize clearly as being Arabic and that are very distinct from those written in a more evolving Nabatean Aramaic script, if you like. And if you turn it round, Arabian monotheist inscription, Arabic monotheist inscriptions are always written in this distinctive script. So is there a link between the evolution of this Arabic script or a connection between its evolution and the emergence of monotheism in Arabia? So to have a quick look at these texts, they're found pretty much all the way, which is interesting. So all the way down in the south at Himma near Najran, very simple tomb inscription of a guy called Thawban ibn Malik. It just gives the date of his death. The ones from Syria are the most, if you like, evidently Arabic. If you were just to show it to people, show these row of texts, if you like, including this one and say this one from Duma, to anyone who knew nothing about epigraphy. It's definitely these ones that are most Arabic looking, if you like. I wonder whether there's been some aesthetic influence from Syriac script, which is obviously dominant in the area. This one from Jebel Sais in southern Syria, and Haran, which is also from the same area, just a bit further to the west. Because this Nabatean Aramaic has this slightly boxy kind of aesthetic to it, whereas if you look at the Jebel Sais inscription, you'll see it's much kind of nicer and tighter. But since there's not so many of these, then they're all very well known to those who work on pre-Islamic Arabic. This one from a guy saying, أنا رقيم ورقيم ابن معرف الأوسي أرسلني الحارث الملك على. So I, Raqim ibn Mu'arif, was sent by King Harith of the Ghassanid dynasty to Usais. He says maslahatan or musalahatan as a kind of guard unit, and he gives the year. This is actually my favorite pre-Islamic Arabic inscription because it has a very big backstory to it, if you like. When you see an inscription, you can just focus on the little bits and pieces of how it's put together from the letter shapes and there's the philology, but there's also a big historical backstory to them. So this is on the lintel of a church. It's actually bilingual, it's in Greek and Arabic. You can see the end part of the Greek here. The Arabic is actually dominant. It must have been first, it goes over onto the Greek side and the Greek has to fit in. Someone declared, Ana Sharahil ibn Zalim, I built this martyrium, Banat Hadha al-Martul. And this is at times, it's 567 AD. He's obviously a member of a provincial Arab elite, but he's kind of made it, if you like. You do not get in an empire the right to just simply inscribe whatever you like in whatever language you like in a text. It's the imperial languages that get written, Latin, Greek, Aramaic. So this is the first time that Arabic appears, as far as we know, anyway, it's the first discovered in a monumental setup. This is obviously someone who's achieved, the ranks of the Roman elite, and he can, he does it in the usual way. You pay for a fancy monument. It's a bit like, now my institute in New York, it's got lots of fancy letters from as the donor in the institute. You get to, if you reach that sort of elite, you get to put your name up and you get to decide the text. So this guy has kind of made it, if you like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the Greek, what does the Greek inscription say?
So it also gives his name. It adds a couple of things. It says that he's a philarch. Is that in there? Philarchos. I don't know if it's there actually. And then it gives the date, which is handy. So it's a check on there. It's very different, and this has caused some debate. Especially Christian Robin has tried to offer different interpretations of this, because the Arabic says, okay, I built this monastery and then this martyrium in the year, and then it says Ba'da, well, the usual accepted reading is Ba'da Masad Khaybar. But in the Greek, it mentions Saint John, and so Christian Robin had suggested that the guy, he's basically dyslexic, and he meant to write Muqaddas so it's Ayos in the Greek, the holy, and then John will be Hunayn Khaybar. It's very close actually.
Because the Greek inscription looks like a bit older because it fits into the frame, and the Arabic came a bit later. I mean, this is the first thing that pops into the...
Yeah, it's actually the same. I could actually show you this, but the fact that it's written in Greek, the name Saraelos, so it actually has his name, son of Zalim, it actually puts his name in the Greek, so it must be, it's definitely the same person, and it's saying the same thing. I built this martyrium, or he built this martyrium. So it's unlikely it's not contemporary. I think it's more just the Arabic is actually very nicely written, actually, but it's definitely, well, almost certainly pre-Islamic, especially because it's giving us the dating. The Greek and Arabic datings match up as well, so it's unlikely that it's they're not contemporary.
Is it 657 AD?
No, 567.
567.
Yeah. So yeah, this is one of the rather nice pre-Islamic ones. They're fairly simple. So this one's 527, 528, the Jabal Sais inscription. But this is still at the point of being more of a informal, private graffito. This is just Raqim has decided to make a note of this, but it's not official in a monumental sense. It's not there for all the world to see. Whereas this is, it's rather nice actually. I went to see it, and daughter of the house came out proudly. She was 16. She read it to me and told me what it said in Arabic.
Still existing as it is.
Well,
This house.
everything, unfortunately, in Syria, you can never be sure anymore. I haven't been since 2010, so I'm not sure for the moment. The third one is actually slightly earlier, 512 AD, but it's only a set of signatures below a bilingual Greek Syriac inscription in a church in Zebed, which is south of Aleppo. So it's just a series of names. But it says the Nasrullah at the beginning. Well, probably Nasr, you can just about see the Ra here, Nasrullah rather. And then it's just a number of people sign it in Arabic, write their names up. Again, you see what I mean? I don't know if you see what I mean, but anyway, the kind of neatness of the writing. So if you look at Sargo here, the seam, it's very like tightly, just the three notches and the Ra, really very neat little backward C, and the Wow as well. It's really neat. Again, south of Aleppo, so it's in the more Syriac kind of area. And then, rather nicely, Leah Mehmet, during a survey of Dumat al-Jandal, found this new one, well, not so new now, but Dhakara al-Ilah, and then we have the cross nearby, so we know it's a Christian inscription. At least, I mean, how much that means. This is a case where sometimes we know more about the backstory, as in the Haran inscription, but ones like this, unfortunately, there must be a big backstory, but we just don't know enough about it. So, plausibly Christian, what Christian meant in being Christian in Dumat al-Jandal, we don't know. It's the same with Jewish inscriptions in South Arabia. People just say Jewish inscriptions, but what exactly did that mean? Were they, did they follow the Talmud? Were they following all the standard rituals of Judaism, or was it actually something quite different? Then, particularly very exciting, there's a lot of new inscriptions popping up. This is one of the biggest changes for me coming to Saudi Arabia. It's when I first wrote about Arabic inscriptions, which is actually a very long time ago now, an article in 1997. It was extremely difficult getting hold of publications of Saudi Arabian catalogues of inscriptions. I remember I went to the Damascus book fair, and there was a Saudi press, and they had lots of these publications. And I said, "Oh, fantastic! I'll buy all these." And they said, "No, not for sale." And I said, "What do you mean they're not for sale?" And I had, but then it was a very actually nice kind of, if you like, a generous Arab stereotype. And he called the senior guy up and said, "You can have all the books for free." And so they just gave me a big box of the books, and that was very handy because I managed to publish that article. Now these are all on Instagram and others, so they're very easy to find. The only problem is it's not always clear the exact context or exact location, but very exciting. We're about to get a new project started in the next few weeks even, which will actually start to more seriously enter all these texts into a database, locate them, geolocate them, and so on. So that's very exciting. But these are found between Ta'if and Tabuk in particular, which is mainly just to do with topography. The sandstone rocks around here are fantastic for inscribing on and preserve well the inscriptions. There's a small number which, interestingly, seem to be monotheistic. This one, for example, Bismika Allahumma ana Abshams ibn al-Mughira yastaghfir rabbahu. He seeks forgiveness of his Lord. We can't really tell exactly. Asking forgiveness of the Supreme God is common, say, to Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. So this is being argued that, so because this guy's son fights in the Battle of Yamama in 11 AH, I mean, it means his father, plausibly, is writing already, well, he certainly was alive before Islam. Whether he is definitely writing this before Islam is unsure. That's why I just bring these here to attention, partly because it raises for us a lot of interesting questions. Ahmed Al-Jalad, who's kind of been publishing some of these, is arguing strongly that they are pre-Islamic. But you're right, I don't think there's anywhere we can 100% say they definitely must be pre-Islamic. But they're actually still, there's a particular group which uses this expression, Uwasi Birullah, which is kind of interesting. I recommend piety to God. And it's interesting, the use of Uwasi is Islamic in the sense of you get a lot of letters, Uwasi bitaqwa Allah. But Bir Allah is unusual, and there's quite a few of them. I personally am a bit agnostic until we can get precisely much more careful
These
recording.
terminologies are not in Christianity.
Sorry?
These terminologies are not in Christianity.
Not directly so. So asking forgiveness for sure, mercy thing, but wasi is an odd expression. So it's not, yeah. So it's not incompatible with Christianity. But that's a tricky thing. It's a bit like saying Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. It's not incompatible with Christianity for a Christian to say in the name of God the Merciful. But obviously it has a Muslim Islamic flavour to it.
And the name Abid Shams is also like outside of
Yeah.
the sphere of monotheism in a way.
Yeah.
Al-Azza also.
Yeah, yeah. This is a particular unusual name. Yeah. And so again, it's not. It doesn't clinch because Abdul Uzza. I mean, my name is pagan actually, Robert. But you know, names can continue for a long time.
Christianity, then Islam came.
Yeah, yeah. So personally, I'm a bit agnostic still about these, or at least I await kind of nice, careful study of these. But there are quite a few.
Allah is not in Christianity. Allah is in Christianity.
Yeah, so there's a lot of argument. So the usual expression, or the way it's written, is always dhakara al-ilah on these. The ones that we have that are Christian, it's always al-ilah. Again, this is a kind of philological debate, which is very tricky. Allah, al-ilah, you know, you say Allah, I say al-ilah, you know. it's a very difficult question. There's been, there's a guy called Aziz al-Azmi, who's actually a kind of interesting scholar. He wrote a big book on Islam in late antiquity, and he argues that that Allah is really reflecting pagan deity, Allah, and then so there's a kind of, if you like, pagan backwater hangout reservation, whatever, in Saudi Arabia, and this stays, and then it goes more directly towards Islam, not via Christianity or Judaism, which is probably the main aim he wants to show. It's an interesting book, but these are big arguments that hang on very, very small little interpretations. So yeah, how do you get Allah? I mean, you could easily argue that Allah is actually quite an old formulation, so you get in Nabatean inscription, pagan inscriptions, names like Taym Allahi. The Ya is just an ending, so really it's Taym Allah. But it's not easy to clinch these arguments. I know Ahmed argues that they are pretty much, and actually I'm fairly sure he has one Greek example where Wahd Allah is written in Greek, and therefore we're more sure that it is in the formula Allah before Islam. But yeah, these are tricky questions. What they do, and I'll move this onto the conclusion, is that these texts help us rethink an old question, like what sort of monotheism do we have in Arabia? Is there a distinct Arabian form of monotheism? Are there many forms of monotheism in Arabia? There was an old idea put out by a professor of Arabic at Oxford, Freddie Beeston, his name was, called Rahmanism, just because you get a lot of the use of the word Rahman to refer to the deity you get in the south. For example, in this one from Zafar, 433 AD, they raised their palaces by the grace of Rahman. Inscriptions of King Abraha, again in the name of Ar-Rahman, and the Quran uses Rahman many times. So there was an idea that actually Arabia developed its own form of monotheism. In the worship of Rahman is slightly different from Christianity or Judaism. And there's been, over the last 15 years, I would say, a lot of studies rethinking the degree to which you might have many different monotheistic communities in, well, anywhere, not just Arabia, but actually that we tend to think so much in these rather rigid blocks of Judaism, Christianity, and so on, and think that they're very monolithic. So there's been a lot of debate should we think of many different sorts of communities. This is an ongoing debate. I'm not going to give an answer to that one. There is a sense in the Quran, actually, that some form of monotheism's there already before Muhammad. So, for example, the mushrikun, when they're asked questions like who created the heavens and earth, subjected the sun and the moon, they will say God. This is presumably the Prophet Muhammad getting annoyed, saying, hey, you guys, you talk about God all the time, so why aren't you, following me in proper Tawheed, following proper monotheism? But as soon as they get back from their voyages or dangers, when they've been saying, oh, God help me, they all turn back to their worship of the jinn and so on. But anyway, there's and this is part of some of the new thinking, that actually the situation in the Quran, everyone had assumed it was just pagans, and then Muhammad comes with worship of one God. But actually, if reading closely about who the mushrikun were and what they say, it looks like actually they have already are talking about God as well. What you would expect to happen if you go and look at what's happened, say in Brazil, take a totally different place, what happens when Christianity arrives, it's not that everyone suddenly switches overnight to become Christian. There's actually a long period of kind of progressive assimilation, adaptation, if you like, and often inserting older native deities into the new religion. So like having a black Madonna, for example, as the Virgin Mary, and so on. So you see actually, and pagan festivals like the Day of the Dead, which is still very popular in Mexico, these going into it. So you might think that the mushrikun, it's not that they're actually, if you like, in a process of change. There's monotheisms are spreading very substantially from 300, and so it's giving rise to different versions of monotheism. But it's a very different, it's a sort of debate that academics like, because it's a great one to talk about, but there's no way to prove it either way, because we don't have enough data. But that's great. People can't really prove you wrong. And you could say that the Quran has a kind of inclusive vision of monotheism. It's not strictly one or the other, Jewish, Christian, Islam, but the second quote is rather nice. Only those who are Jews and the people of the book will say only those who are Jews and Christians will enter paradise, but rather whoever submits before God and is virtuous will have his reward with his Lord. So you see almost a move to be inclusive. My question, though, is less to do exactly with can we sort out what monotheism is being practiced, as rather whether there's a connection between the spread of the script, the evolution of the Arabic script as a distinctive form in its own right, and the spread of religion in late antique Arabia. Elsewhere, if we look across the Middle East and Europe, many scripts are developed, adapted sometimes from earlier scripts, or even invented anew for preaching Christianity, so that there's an idea that you should teach among Christian missionaries, that you teach in the language of those you're trying to convert. And interestingly, this kind of impulse is there in the Quran. See the idea, we never sent a messenger except in the language of his people. And it's repeated a number of times that we sent an Arabic Quran, so that you may warn, so that you may understand, etc. There's a lot of emphasis on it being an Arabic Quran. There's a rather nice set of verses about that it could have been revealed in Ajami, which I like to think is actually Aramaic, because that would be more traditional, but to help people understand better, we're making it an Arabic Quran. So there's kind of emphasis on it being in people's own spoken language. And the Quran certainly has a strong emphasis on writing. It's actually, I find it very interesting, some verses like Quran 2282, how strong, in fact, the emphasis on writing. In some ways it's sad, because you realize that there probably were huge numbers of documents produced, and not a single one, unfortunately, has come down to us. In this verse, where it says that when you contract a debt for a specific term, write it down. Let a scribe write it between you fairly, so there's access to scribes, presumably. So it's very much a written environment. We tend to assume it's rather basic. Everyone's only, using oral means for transaction, but no, it's obviously a written culture, and especially for writing documents. It's just, sadly for us, they haven't survived. So this is a kind of evolving debate, because these pre-Islamic Arabic inscriptions, or Arabic inscriptions on the cusp of the Islamic period, just before, just after Muhammad's lifetime, are kind of cropping up, circulating in rather unorthodox ways, so it's difficult to follow them and to properly study them. You have to, especially, I'm not that much of a technophile, so I don't really scour Twitter and so on for new information. But they're interesting for showing, one, that Arabic is written down more often and in more places than have been supposed, and that monotheistic ideas were being expressed in Arabic across Arabia in the late antique period. But really, it's a kind of watch this space scenario. There's going to be lots of new developments on this, especially with all the new projects being initiated by the Royal Commission of Al-Ula. So I'm excited to come back again in a couple of years and hear about a whole set of new theories has emerged about this. But thank you for listening.
Yes, so my first question is to your citation about if this writing, this language, vanished in the 8th century, for example, it would have been called, labeled Nabatean or late Nabatean, right? And so the question is, like, it survived, recycled in different ways, so what do we call this specifically? Like, we're talking about the 5th, 6th century. Is it labeled Syro-Nabatean, Syro-Arabic? I mean, is there any specific, you label it as Arabic, sure, because based on, or like benchmarked on Arabic, modern Arabic, but like, if this is the case, so what do we, how do you label it? Like, by chronology, by geography?
Yeah, so Leila Nehme has been very kind of influential in this, because she's put a huge amount of effort into trying to catalogue and collect all this material. So she has a very clear distinction between fully Nabatean Aramaic texts, Nabateo-Arabic, which she sees where the Aramaic forms of the letters are becoming adapted somewhat for the purposes of writing Arabic, which requires more letters, for example, since the Aramaic alphabet is only 22, whereas Arabic has 29 sounds that it wants to write. And then fully Arabic in the sense of, oh, that's annoying, it's gone off. Arabic in the sense of those that are clearly, we would say it's definitely Arabic. Is that helpful? I mean, this is for academic usage. If you mean what do they think, we don't really know, obviously, for sure, how much of a distinction. Yeah, I mean, there's no way for us to know for sure, except for, of course, the Quran gives us a fixed point in the 620s that Arabi is a term for the language and presumably for the script. I doubt they made a distinction between them.
And second question for me as well. This specific Arabic, like from with these texts, monotheistic texts, we found them in South Arabia as well. How? Because this question emanates from my ignorance about South Arabian and how it evolved into Arabic, or like how it dissolved into Arabic. So what is the threshold between the South Arabian and this coming through, or I don't know if I'm making a point.
Yeah. So in language terms, South Arabian certainly doesn't coalesce into Arabic. It's a totally different alphabet, actually.
Yes.
It's going back 1000 BC, it's Arabian alphabet has its own forms. That is 29 letters. In some ways it would have been better if Arabic had been written in that. But and the language is very different.
So this spread of this northern to south, when it happened, like how often do we see it? I mean, we can see it, we can trace it during this monotheistic, with these monotheistic inscriptions, but like how very often, I mean, this is very common, it seems very common in the north, but not very common in the south.
So are you talking about script or language here?
Both.
Right. Because for Arabic script in the south, we don't see at the moment. There's this little cluster from Hema near Najran of plausibly Arabic script texts, and then this kind of new cluster that's appearing, especially around Tabuk, and then Dumat al-Jandal as a couple. So they're still only in clusters, but I suppose we're assuming that they're at least spread along routes anyway.
Yeah.
So Dumat al-Jandal on the way to Hira, which actually Arabic sources, Muslim Arabic sources normally see as the place of invention of the Arabic script. For the language, so that's more tricky. For South Arabia, it's a very distinct language. It's not Arabic at all, so there's no kind of half-half. And you assume that's simply a result of conquest, internal conquest, that it's only after Islam and as Arabic ever more becomes the dominant language of the new Islamic empire. It's kind of sad actually, you would have expected more South Arabian culture, history, things like that to have entered into Islamic culture, but actually very little does. Presumably they enter the South Arabian tribes at a disadvantage and so don't manage to push their own culture up into the mainstream Islamic culture. And the language effectively dies out. Hamadani, who's travelling around in the 10th century, he's able to tell you about certain phrases in a couple of places where they speak a distinct dialect, which is likely to be a South Arabian survival, but by and large he doesn't really know anything about it. But South Arabia is also an unusual case because we do have, of course, quite a few survivals still now, like Mehri, Jibli and so on. But they actually oddly don't match up with what we see in our South Arabian inscriptions. But that's probably because Sabaic is so dominant. It's a bit like Latin in Europe, so everyone really, if they're going to write in these very formal texts, they write in Sabaic. But probably things like Jebeli and Mehri and so on are reflections of many other dialects that were only spoken and were never actually written down. But it's difficult to give a full picture just because we do only have these, small little bits of inscriptions here and there.
Anyone else have a question?
Yes, please. Comparing Arabic to Arabic, Professor.
Yeah.
Arabic to Arabic. Is Arabic considered a new language compared to Aramaic? Is it Aramaic, an older language, well structured, established? Many people talk, many writings. Is Arabic a new language compared to Arabic?
So probably not, but tracing a spoken language is inevitably, how far back languages were spoken is almost impossible because we only really know once we get the first appearance either of a whole script, so the first Aramaic inscriptions. They're certainly more evident going right back to the 10th century BC, so it's much clearer. For Arabic we rely on little bits. There's a very famous couple of inscriptions, one a guy called Gindibu who appears in a mid-9th century inscription as leading a coalition against the Assyrians, and it obviously sounds like Arabic jundub, grasshopper, so people say, aha. And then in Assyrian inscriptions, when they're talking about the Arabs and they mention camels, they use the word naqa for camels, she-camel, so it's just, aha, here's a little Arabic word. But we have no coherent, chunks of Arabic until the, probably these inscriptions from the Roman period. But it's in a general way, presumably, spoken languages go back a long way, but we have a lack of evidence, really. So.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
One.
I
Yeah,
have
please.
one brief
Yes,
question,
sir.
which is Are there other languages that are also expressing monotheism at the same time that Arabic is emerging and doing that?
In Arabia?
Yeah.
So, yeah, so Syriac is a little bit, so here we need to distinguish between literary and inscriptions. So, well, you have Ge'ez from this brief period when Aksumite troops go across to South Arabia and actually effectively conquer it for a while. So we have some Ge'ez inscriptions that were set up, which are in the name of God, Christ. Then we have a couple of Syriac texts, which we actually got a couple just recently on our on torpedo jars. But actually, they're not actually monotheistic though. So in inscriptions, extremely few, but in literary texts, there's a lot more. So we have martyrdom texts. For Najran, there's a colossal amount of material in literature. You know, it's obviously something that grips the Byzantine Empire. There's a immense struggle between the Jews and the Christians fighting the Jews in this area, and so we get so many different accounts in many different languages: Greek, Syriac, Ge'ez, and actually it gets into Armenian even. So it's a very widespread, much repeated text.
Okay. Anyone else? Well, thank you very much, again, Robert. I appreciate you getting here finally through all your tribulations, and for giving this really interesting talk.
I was trying to put it up actually, so that's the full lintel with the Greek and the Arabic. So it's actually the same.